Dear friends, thank you for supporting this channel on Patreon to join our growing family of donors, now 59 patrons strong. And remember, once we reach 100 active patrons, we will start sending out a 1-ounce US Silver Eagle, autographed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, to one active supporter each and every month. Thanks for taking a minute to pitch in by going to patreon.com/ReluctantPreppers and pledging your support today. Thanks very much.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight. Derrick Michael Reid is a candidate for US Senate from California. He is the only senatorial candidate from California endorsed by the US Libertarian Party. Or is it the California Libertarian Party?
The California Libertarian Party, and thank you very much, Dunnigan, for inviting me back.
We're glad to have you here again on Reluctant Preppers. The last time you were with us, you spoke with us on the topic of both the wealth and power transfer from the middle class to the elite, of many aspects of that. And we'd like to have you back again to talk with us on this eve of the elections there in California about these global wealth transfers, how they are affected, and how people can be aware and prepared for that so that they do not become victims of that, but instead can do something about it, both in their own lives and collectively as a society.
Yes, last time we introduced the concept of global wealth transfer, basically from the poor middle class to the financial elite. There were 4 presidents: Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., and Obama. They all spoke about the New World Order. And so I've got to ask myself, well, they're all 4 referring to it, so what is it and what are they doing? And the only reasonable extrapolation is going to the financial centers of the world. I'm talking about the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, controlling central banks, commercial banks around the globe, and this money structure basically controlling corporations. So they basically have the corporate and financial world tied up for the primary purpose of transferring wealth from the poor to the rich. Now, we have heard about a one world government, which is really a one world communist government. And you ask yourself, why would this financial cabal, this banking cabal, want a one world government? And the answer is surprisingly simple. It's much easier to bribe a few people at the very top than go around to all of these different countries and try to corrupt all of their politicians and businessmen. So you have to think in terms of that pyramidal structure. Once you get that in your mind, you then have to ask yourself, how are they actually transferring wealth, and how do they sustain that wealth transfer?
As you describe that to us, if you could make sure that you give us concrete examples, and I know you will, but a lot of people who are viewers of our channel have tried to explain to their family members or to loved ones or coworkers or whatever, friends, and it sounds counter-cultural to talk about these things. It sounds like fringe type of, people call it conspiracy theory or whatever, but this is real stuff. This is concrete, specific, and very calculated steps that have been going on for a long time. So please go right ahead. I just wanted you to be aware that our audience is keenly interested in the specific examples you can give them, because it really helps people to connect the dots, as you have, in understanding that dynamic.
Well, if the Obama administration can weaponize the IRS, the DOJ, the FBI, the CIA, to go after political opponents without most people realizing it, most people should now come to the realization is that it's only a conspiracy theory until it ain't. Okay? Now, if you don't know what the New World Order is, Maybe we should go ask the last 4 presidents what they meant by the New World Order, because they're the ones who put it on the table, not us. Now, global wealth transfer from poor to rich is occurring on a global scale. And that is processed through basically implementation steps and then maintenance steps. And you wanted to give examples. I'm going to first rip off a few items that are involved in wealth transfer and then go back and give some examples if you want.
Sure.
We can talk about fiat currency devaluation, market manipulation, drug addiction, taxes, debt, trade, immigration, healthcare, agriculture, subprime auto, subprime housing, imprisonment. These are things that touch all of our lives. We are all invested in these aspects of our societies to some degree or another. So let's take the first one, fiat devaluation. A guy is working on minimum wage, let's just say $20 an hour. He's making barely enough to pay rent and feed his face. Got another fat cat over there who's got tens of millions of dollars in property. The Federal Reserve System, through their printing of fiat currency, causes inflation. Over the last 100 years, we're down 98%. The dollar has lost 98% of its value. The guy who's making $20 an hour, he sees the real inflation rate hitting him of 6%. He loses that from his purchasing power immediately. He's going to feel that. Prices go up 6%. He can't buy as much. He's suffering. You go over to the fat cat. Now, most of his property is going to be in tangible assets. Real property, stocks, bullion, for example. Now, his tangible assets are going to be basically going up with inflation in terms of nominal value. So he's protected, whereas the guy making $20 an hour gets hurt. Okay, so that kind of shows you with respect to the fiat. Drug laundering, you've got an addict who's stealing from his neighbor to get money to buy drugs. He's taking that money, giving it to the local pusher, then the distributor, and it goes all the way up to HSBC and the banks, because the banks want their 6% cut. We would not be having the CIA creating heroin fields in Afghanistan if it weren't but for the bankers wanting their 6%. It's called money laundering, and it's done through drug trafficking on a global scale, and it is the banking cabal that's the biggest pushers in the world. We can talk about taxes, and every time they deficit spend, they actually transfer power from the people into government. Why is that important? Because we need government to keep the people locked down into a particular lifestyle so as to sustain the wealth transfer. So taxes are a means of transferring wealth to the government, which in turn, for example, through Federal Reserve policies, enrich the banks. And so the taxes are there to maintain a status quo. The taxes do not really effectively eliminate the income inequality through a progressive tax rate of taxing the very rich. It just doesn't do that. Now, they claim that it does, but that is a red herring. It doesn't really do that. If a guy's making $1 million and he's paying 30%, let's say, in taxes, whereas the guy who's making 20 isn't going to be paying any, okay? He still has that 70%, which is still hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the guy who's making 20. Okay? Sure. It doesn't really even the playing field. And when I say income inequality, I'm talking about laborers getting their fair wage, okay? This basically started with the creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. That's when the income equality started to take off. That's when you could really see the well-to-do making more and more, as the average guy just kind of middled around a little bit. Now, the unions were a good thing. It's too bad they went heavily into politics, because when you go into politics one side, the other side's going to sit on you. The unions are good. They were there to help the workers, but they went into politics and caused their own dilution, so to speak. But unions are a good thing. In trade, we can talk about gutting the American manufacturing base.
Right.
Transferring jobs overseas. Now that's hurting America, and you ask why you do this. Right now there is a titanic struggle going on between the United States, headed by Trump, who is a nationalist, Xi of China, and Putin of Russia. All three are strong nationalists. They are up against the EU-centered banking cabal, and this would be the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers being at the very, very top, having controlling interest of various banks. In order to secure a one world government, you have to defeat Russia, China, and the US now with Trump, and that's a big obstacle. And right now the tide is turning a little bit towards nationalism than the one world government. Immigration, we can talk in terms of bringing people here who then in turn send monies back. Again, it's all about suppressing Americans' middle class wages and destroying the strength of the nationalists, the U.S. That is why you see the New World Order, if you will, the Soroses, the Bilderbergs, the Illuminati, the Khazarians, to the extent they even exist, supporting the totalitarian progressives of the Democrat Party. Because the Democrats are pushing more and more laws that restrict our liberties and freedoms. For example, they want to take our guns, you see. And before a totalitarian lockdown occurs, you have to pull the guns. And they are long-term planners. If you look at healthcare, it all gets back into feeding a socialist, totalitarian type government. But it has worked in such a way that drug prices are out of sight.
They sure are.
Money is going from the average guy to the big pharma, which is nothing more than another CEO controlled by the New World Order. Okay, so understand that they've been able to penetrate our entire political complex through bribe contributions. And I do not believe that the rank and file Democrats, or even most in Congress, actually realize they're getting played. Imagine some big boss who tells his subordinate, who then has a runner, who then goes over through several steps to finally get to the CEO and say, we want you to perform in this particular way. The guy who's pulling the strings is so far divorced from the actual bribe contribution of our senators and congressmen that they don't even realize they're getting played. Yeah, he took some big pharma money, and yeah, he just rubber stamped some big pharma bill before Congress. And you might say, well, they're doing it for their constituency. I do not believe that the rank and file Democrats or the senators and congressmen actually realize they're getting played by the New World Order banking cabal. Whether or not we talk about big pharma or big agriculture, it's still the same thing. We want bigger, powerful corporations that violate antitrust laws, again, as centers for sucking wealth from the people. You can even talk about imprisonment. We now have the prison lobby being the largest lobby in D.C., and now it's for profit. So if you want to throw people in jail, that's okay. The corporations will step up and get their cut and make money off of that. We could talk about subprime autos, subprime housing. I don't know if you recall the robo-signing when during the 07-08 financial crash, the Great Recession, they call it, the banks were getting all these properties, and all they did was just have robo-signers on the forfeiture documents to put into the courts. The courts finally found out about that and reversed a lot of them. But what happened was that the Federal Reserve, by buying all these toxic assets, ended up owning a lot of property. They took the homes and property off the people through market manipulation. Market manipulations is also another way of implementing the wealth transfer. You can think of mom and pop going and buying a few stocks, and then you have these big boys come in and start manipulating with the bubbles and pops. And when you have this market action going up and down, the traders make out. Mom and pop get stopped out, lose their shirts. Again, it's just a casino, but the markets are manipulation is another way in which they implement that. The U.S. has a housing problem, a homeless problem, an unemployment problem, an infrastructure problem, a minimum wage problem, a jobs problem, an education problem, an income inequality problem, and a hunger problem, among many other problems. Because we have singularly a prosperity problem. Now you think about this. California right now doesn't have enough money to repair the Oroville Dam, for example. And Sacramento can't get enough taxes. Okay? They got all these problems. And so they resort to increasing taxes.
Right.
But if prosperity was going full on, okay, and I'm talking about the go-go 20s, I'm talking about back in the 1960s when we had a manufacturing base and we can do. If there's sufficient prosperity, people have jobs, they don't need to depend on government as much, they can afford their own insurance, they can pay their own rent and food, and they can also, through robust economy, deliver more taxes to the state to maintain some of the things that they need to do. So we have all of these problems, but you can basically break it down to one problem, and that is a prosperity problem. The reason we have a prosperity problem is because of the wealth transfer poor to rich. We have a prosperity problem because we singularly have a corruption problem. Corruption is what enables these implementations.
Makes sense.
And so as a U.S. Senator, my three top priorities are fixing the immigration problem because the Democrats and Republicans can't seem to do it. I know how. The imprisonment problem, 2.2 million incarcerated, is just way too much. I've got a plan to solve that. Now, those are two things that I want to solve immediately, and I think I can. Grabbing the Republicans and the Democrats by the ears, banging heads and saying, okay, here's the common ground, let's get this thing solved. But the third one that I want to go after is corruption. Because if you can eliminate corruption in D.C., prosperity will come back in a big way. And instead of having all of the states across the country broke, their coffers would be flush with tax revenues. People would be having higher standards of living. Corruption is the key. And you might think, well, the wealth transfers are maintained basically through the banking cabal using corruption. What they want to do is they want to instill totalitarian, socialistic type governments where the government has firm control and the people are dependent upon government because that makes them very easy to control as an outside influence. So that's why you're seeing, mostly on the left, pushes towards more totalitarianism and pandered socialism. Another thing that they do is they cause regime change wars. Now, to get into that, Syria. And Putin is the bad guy because he's a nationalist. In order to diminish Putin, we want to run Gulf oil from the Gulf through Syria up into the Mediterranean to compete with Putin. That's what Syria is all about. It's a New World Order play to diminish Putin, who is one of the nationalists. Now, what the regime change wars do is, of course, they produce profits in the industrial military complex.
That's for sure.
And so you have now the military, the big corporations, the banks, they're all in there trying to get as much profit as they can. And the more they get, the more they want. It just feeds on itself. And so those are the ways in which they maintain these wealth transfers implementations, through a banking cabal that has its fingers into all central banks and major banks and owning corporations, the corruption that they can then pervade, and they want to do it with a fairly authoritarian type of government. That means totalitarianism, that means socialism. And of course, what they also do is they suppress bullion to make the fiat regime appear to be more sound than it actually is. The fiat system is a wonderful thing for them to use because they can get their central banks to print as much as they want for whatever purposes they want. And that's probably the last one that is used for maintaining the wealth transfer implementation, is the suppression of bullion. Now, I think any reasonable person should conclude that with 50 million hungry, 100 million unemployed, $21 trillion in national debt, 250 trillion in unfunded liabilities, with the rancor on the streets between the political parties off the charts, I think that most reasonable Americans could conclude that the two major pandering political machines have failed the country. Look at where we're at right now. With all the hoopla that Trump is doing with his stock market and the employment rates, I consider the numbers to be manipulated, but they just down revised, I think, the first quarter 2018 GDP to 2.2, which is right in line with the Obama years. There is no big recovery going on. In fact, it's looking like it's about ready to slide off the table and crash. In terms of the corruption, I'd like to go through and give you an example of the types of corruptions that permeate our society. You know, I can go back and think about my youth in the 1960s. We didn't have this stuff. This wasn't here, but let's see if we can go through.
Sure, go right ahead.
The mainstream media has been corrupted. I mean, if CNN is going to have 98% anti-Trump essays on their show, right, that is prima facie case of propaganda. I'm sorry, it's propaganda, and it's not just CNN, it's the entire legacy media. They are spewing propaganda bought and sold by the New World Order. What are they pushing? Totalitarianism, socialism. Okay? Understand that the reasons why they're doing this. Our internet has been corrupted. Now, we can get into the FCC net neutrality. Yep. The left wants to go to the FCC with net neutrality. Why? Because the FCC doesn't have any teeth. Zuckerbergs can get in there, steal your data, censor your speech, do all these kinds of nefarious things, and get away with it. What I think the Republicans are going to try to do is bring back net neutrality, but put it before the Federal Trade Commission, because they're the ones who oversee antitrust. And if you remember, there a couple days ago, there was I think a district court that told Trump that you've got to unblock his Twitter feed. Why? Because Twitter has become such a dominant position that this is really a public utility. And public utilities do not go around violating constitutional rights. In other words, They put Facebook as a monopoly in the Facebook business and say, you control too much of the business, and we are going to, through the FTC now, the Federal Trade Commission, we're going to require that you adhere to the Constitution, that you don't ban people because of censorship, political orientation. Now, there's only two types of speech that can be limited. One is obscene speech. That's very traditional in America, is obscene speech, based upon local community standards. And the other one is incitement to violence. Well, I don't think you could really incite somebody to violence over Twitter, but you could use some obscene speech. And so if Twitter sits there and starts redacting or pulling off obscene speech, it'd be okay to do that. So you can see what's going on is that the left wants it up to the FCC, under the FCC, whereas the right wants it under the Federal Trade Commission, and the reason is because of the policing power. The FTC can tell Zuckerman to go pound salt. You're not going to steal people's data, and you're not going to censor their political speech. The Supreme Court has been corrupted by 100 years of ideologue appointments. I don't know if you've ever seen a confirmation hearing, but it's a circus.
Yeah.
They were asking, what was it, Pompeo, the Secretary of State, what he thinks about gay marriage. You're asking the Secretary of State what he thinks about gay marriage? Confirmation hearings are nothing more than a grandstand for politicians to try to get more support or campaign contributions. That's what they have been reduced to. It wasn't like this 50 years ago. I mean, you basically should only ask two questions. Is he qualified? Will he swear to uphold the oath? Those are the only two questions that are really should be on the table. Okay, and so by having these ideologues on the bench, they bastardize the Constitution because they do not rule according to the spirit, object, intent, purpose of the Constitution. They twist the words and rule according to their own ideology.
Right.
And so they have bastardized it. The court has been bastardized by political confirmations, and our Constitution has been bastardized through the judicial fiat that results. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, our Congress, as I've mentioned, is totally corrupt, and they don't even know it. Again, all they see is the bribe contributions. Okay, Corporation X gave me a couple $100,000. Great. Okay, I'll give X corporation a friendly ear, and I'll look at his proposed law, you know, that kind of thing, and then it gets in, and it gets in that way. So I believe that the both houses of Congress are corrupt through bribe contributions, and they are corrupt unwittingly in large measure. The administration is corrupt. We have not only did Obama weaponize the IRS, but these New World Order people have infested the FBI, DOJ, and CIA to where they are actually trying to have a coup against Donald Trump. It's all made up. It's all a big farce. And anybody that's been following it closely, like I have, you just start putting it all together, and there's no other conclusion that you can come to is that elements within the BHO administration actively sought to rig the presidential election, and then after Trump won, tried to discredit and impeach him. Okay, these are people who are operative in our government, and so I'm going to make a prediction here, and you're going to hear it first here. I believe that it is more likely than not. In other words, I think we've got to that 51 percentile probability, and I'm usually 80% correct on my predictions, so that we will see Obama, we will see Clapper and Brennan and Hillary, we will see Lynch and Rice, we will see Comey, McCabe, and a lot of other underlings serve time for treason.
I was wondering when the treason word was going to come up, because as everything you've been describing about trying to undermine and unseat a sitting U.S. president, when I was in civics class in 8th grade and 12th grade and whatever, we would have called that treason. You're trying to undermine the very operation, the very leadership of your own government.
Oh yeah, and this Hillary Clinton. I mean, when you put it all together, she is one sad individual. And continuing with corruption now, they have corrupted our money. It's no longer money. It's a currency. It's a worthless currency. It's nothing more than a piece of paper. We used to have real money, okay? So they have corrupted our medium of exchange. And they, of course, do that because it enables the transfer of wealth, private to public, poor to rich. Okay.
Also unconstitutional, right? I mean, that's the money provided for by the Constitution.
Try explaining that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting you. I'm sorry.
No, fine. I wanted to piggyback on something that you mentioned earlier about the poor $20K a year working soul who's the devaluation of the currency through dilution and through quantitative easing or whatever. It directly impacts his take-home pay, as you mentioned, but there are several other impacts that other guests have mentioned as well, and that is, as opposed to the wealthy guy who's put all his money into ranch land and bullion and things like that, the poor guy has got his money, if he's got it, anything that he's been able to save, he's saving it in cash, and that cash is getting devalued. So his bank accounts, his certificates of deposit, they're all devalued. His pension plan is being devalued. So everywhere that the ordinary working class soul, the middle class has put their cash is being devalued, whereas the wealthy who's put this into assets, those are inflating in value. And then even in a more sinister way, you didn't mention, but I thought I wanted to jump on with you with the taxation, is because you mentioned about the progressive tax, but the so-called progressive tax, like, for example, the alternative minimum tax, AMT, is supposed to be graduated so that as your income goes up nominally, you get more and more penalized with the increased rate of like alternative minimum tax. Well, that was supposed to get the top 1%ers back when it was put in place, but now you've got average middle-class families that, because of this devaluation of the currency, their income appears to be pushing up into the categories where they're getting more tax for social, FICA tax, they're getting more tax for AMT and so on. So it pushing them up into higher tax brackets without giving them any more purchasing power. So just wanting to agree with you emphatically on that regard.
Yes. They practically gutted our middle class, the middle and poor, the working middle class and working poor. They're seeing their wages, savings, and pensions devalued day by day by day. There's 3 guys own as much as half of all Americans, transferring wealth up into that top 1%. And so another form of corruption, of course, was the money, but they also corrupt our hearts and our minds through pandered socialism. Vote for me and I'll give you the goodies. Socialism corrupts everything it touches. It eventually fails, but yet they're out there pandering it.
Yeah, when you talked before about dependency as one of the covert goals, you said totalitarianism and dependency, and the dependency is cloaked as benevolence. It's saying, we're going to give you all these things because we care so much. We are the party who cares. We care for the undertrodden and the underprivileged and the marginalized, and therefore we're going to provide this program and this program and this program and this program. And it sounds like, wow, whether it's the come on in, open the borders and let the immigrants come on in, and they're going to give them all this support, or whether it's now you're a child, whether you're up to 26 years old, now you're a child, you need support because we're so benevolent, and yet the real the dark side of that is that it plays into our weak human nature that's ready to go, well, okay, I see how this playing field is structured. I'm being incentivized to just roll over and take these freebies, but in doing that, they're taking your heart, because it's the heart of our
Right.
country is fierce independence and self-reliance and the can-do attitude and the Yankee ingenuity and all that. So
Yes, yes. And it's the singing sirens of socialism. But after they've gutted our manufacturing and they have transferred all of this wealth, a lot of people out there are having a very difficult time just making it day to day. And you get a politician coming up and promising anything. It's tasty. It sounds good, at the first cut. And anyway, so that is the overall concept of how wealth transfer implementations, maintenance, and the corruption that feeds. And the last one, of course, is corrupting our national defense. We're supposed to defend the country. We're not supposed to be going over and starting other wars for mere political change. I mean, Hillary's fiasco in Ukraine. I mean, they threw out a duly elected president. They don't even honor democracy principles, and they'll go in and they'll start wars. Again, it all gets back to this new world order. Now, I have looked at all of these types of corruption. I know how to solve them. First couple of steps, for example, I would condemn, seize, and transfer the Federal Reserve System under the Department of Treasury. I would take so that the president can now be responsible. Back in 1913, when the banks held all the gold, it kind of made sense that the banks could backstop the government. That's not the case anymore. We're working off of fiat. We don't even use gold anymore. The need and the reason for the Federal Reserve System has long passed us. So that is one thing I'd want to do. I would want to keep the machinery there available, but make the President of the United States responsible with a tremendous amount of congressional oversight. Right now, the Federal Reserve System is a private bank, and they're going to do what their shareholders really want them to do. Another thing that we can do is eliminate individuals who work for the government but are not government employees. And I'm thinking about those in the halls of government, and I'm thinking like the senior executive service. These are private people. They hire them. They come in as consultants. Now, they're working for the government. No, they're not. They're working for their consulting firm. Well, who owns their consulting firm? And that's how that influence gets in. And I suspect that is how a lot of the changing of our intelligent community occurred, was through that penetration. I'm sure there are other areas, but those are the two that I would want to remove immediately as far as something to do concrete. But all of these other types of forms of corruption, there are solutions to it. On my website, DerrickMReid.com, under positions, there's a tab called Solutions. There are 72 solutions that basically go through and eliminate the wealth transfer and eliminate the systemic embedded corruption. I invite all of your listeners, if they've got time, pull up my website, take a look, see. I've thought this all through for 20 years, and it all seems like it's good to go. And the more I watch, it seems like the more it reinforces this perspective of the world and what is going on, particularly in the United States.
Well, I think on this channel you're talking to an audience that's going to be very receptive to your ideas, and partly people have become so jaded, not entirely jaded, but what I say, discouraged by the apparent bleeding off of power from the ordinary citizens to these elite, that they've become disheartened about the possibility of even making real change. So they may agree with your conclusions, they may agree with your viewpoint, they may agree with some of your action plans, but they may be pretty discouraged at this point about can we really get this done? So can you just take a minute to say why you believe? I mean, obviously you're putting your feet right there. You're putting your face out there, your name out there, your life out there. You're saying, I'm ready to serve in this way. What words of encouragement can you give to an ordinary person who has a lifetime of reason for their discouragement to believe that together we really can get this done? Why do we have courage? Why do we have reason for confidence that the powers that be, that like those congressmen that have been enjoying the gravy trains, or those who have the conflicts of interest, or the embedded deep state actors of the New World Order and so on, are going to allow any changes that are going to threaten their power and their elite status to be made at all?
All right. California right now presents a unique situation. California does not need a pandering totalitarian progressive or a rubber stamp farcical conservative. We need someone like myself in the Senate. I have the capacity to understand everybody's perspective and get all perspectives into a mix to finding a common ground solution to start fixing these problems. I spoke of two, immigration and imprisonment. But if for your readers who are just seeing me now, I am an engineer, a lawyer, a systems analyst, a military scientist, a market analyst, and a geopolitical analyst. I'm Six Sigma. There's a few hundred of us in the country. My particular skill set is geared for being able to understand the world and the country, to determine what are the problems, causes of those problems, and devise a comprehensive solution set. I've done the heavy lifting for the country. I need to get into the Senate, bring Democrats and Republicans together to find solutions, and I'm sophisticated enough to go toe-to-toe with the administration and articulate why this solution was work and theirs would not, to be able to give that. And unless I'm able to get some kind of a substantial platform, such as being in the Senate, I don't know if this solution set is going to be adopted. I think that in time it has to. The unfortunate news is that I am not seeing from the Trump administrations the kind of moves necessary. But I do not know what is in Donald Trump's head. He may have thought a lot of this stuff already out. I don't know. But we are still using fiat currency. He is making some things that are, he has done some things that us libertarians like, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to paint Trump, as being wrong all the time. From my perspective, he's done some good things. He's done some things that I don't particularly agree with. I think he's doing a reasonably good job, but he hasn't taken it to the next level. See, right now, he is trying to just keep the system afloat. He's trying to get some new jobs. He's trying to, curb immigration, get more money back into the country, right, more investment money, trying to get the employment going. I think he's honest and I think he's trying hard, but he hasn't reached the solution set yet that's going to fix it all. And I don't know that there will be a sufficient political will to do so. Again, our entire Congress, it has been effectively bribed. They don't even know it, okay? And so I suspect that we're going to need a calamity. We're going to need, a Great Depression. We're going to need for the system to collapse, to where the politicians are sitting there looking at each other. What do we do? The people are sitting there exceedingly angry. All of a sudden, Derrick gets on the floor of the Senate and says, look, if you want it fixed, this is what we got to do. A, B, C, and D. And why? And I can explain what are the problems, what causes these problems, and what is the solution, and give it the rationale. The U.S. Constitution is my playbook. Liberty, freedom, peace, and prosperity are my objectives. If I got to the Senate, there would be, I think, a ray of hope. I would probably have to get to the Senate at the same time that there is a significant correction to where people will actually take the time to consider this solution set as whole. And it all goes together. It's a comprehensive set. You just can't do one little piece. They all go together, and they're all consistent with the Constitution. So I'd ask your readers to take a look at that solution set. It's on my blog. And if any of you are from California, I respectfully request your vote.
We've been talking with Derrick Michael Reid. He has got a blog at derrickmreid.com. Is that correct? And
yes.
He's a candidate for the US Senate from California. He's been endorsed by the California Libertarian Party. Derrick, thank you again, as always, for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you very much for having me back again, Dunnigan.